Jet Li, real name, Li Longji, was born on the 26th of April 1963 in Beijing in a large family, in which two older sons and two older daughters were already growing up. The actor's father, Li Qingcan, died when Li was not even 2 years old. The actor does not even remember what he looked like. The family has fallen on hard times. After losing her husband, Jiang Fenglan became overprotective of her youngest son. Li was forbidden everything that constituted the leisure activities of an ordinary Chinese boy in those years: bicycling, swimming, skating, in short, anything that had the slightest danger. His childhood was spent under the aegis of his mother's constant reprimands: don't touch, don't eat, don't you dare. While all his peers played outside, Li watched them from the window. And he went to school later than the others. At the age of 8, teachers quickly took a liking to the newcomer because he was extremely honest, never disruptive, and did his homework thoroughly. He got A's in all subjects, except music, because Li had no hearing. And the physical education teacher allowed the kid to stand next to him during the big break. After the second lesson in Chinese schools there is a break for exercise, and count: 1, 2, 3, 4. Li started practicing wushu thanks to a happy accident. When he finished first grade, all the junior high school students from Beijing were sent to a sports camp so that they wouldn't have to run around all summer for nothing. The camp was divided into 4 groups: football, swimming, gymnastics and wushu. Li was lucky enough to get into the last one. The boy had no idea what wushu was, but being an obedient student, he diligently followed his coach's instructions. All summer long, he and about 1,000 other kids practiced martial arts for 2.5 hours a day. When the new school year began, the coach told everyone to leave. All but 20 kids, including Jet Li, who was the youngest. His bandmates were in grades 5 to 6. The mentor was even buying Jet's family food since they couldn't afford meat, so essential for proper muscle development. Training became more and more difficult. Every day Li waited for the older boys after school and went with them to the sports school. In winter, it was impossible to train in this old building, and the students were kicked out into the street, but still the boys were freezing, and every movement was painful. Li's mother didn't approve of her son's interests, but when she found out that her 9-year-old son would go to a competition in a neighboring province, she caused a scandal. But the boy made the most important decision in his life and still went to the competition. He performed better than anyone else, and the event was attended by famous athletes. He did not receive any cups, medals or money, as the main prize was the title of excellent. From now on, Li attended only half of his lessons, but his training became more serious. At that time, China, isolated from the Western world for many years, was preparing for an important event, the World Table Tennis Championship. The event was so important to the Chinese authorities that the opening ceremony decided to showcase everything the country was famous for: opera, folk dancing and wushu. Li participated in 3 numbers, which he honed endlessly. After the demonstration of wushu techniques at the biggest stadium in Beijing, the young fighters were invited by the Prime Minister, and in fact the head of the country, Zhou Enlai, the first face of China, praised the boys. It was a huge honor for 9-year-old Li. In those years, even Beijing experienced regular power outages. Every neighborhood in the city was cut off from the grid once a week for one evening. The school where Li studied wushu was traditionally switched off on Fridays. The students were happy, because the evening training in the gym was cancelled. At first it was so, but soon the coach began to drive everyone into the hall, despite the darkness. The only source of light in the room was his torch. The students trained in the dark, giving their best, because no one could predict at what moment the torch beam would fall on him. In one of these dark training sessions, Li twisted his leg and felt pain. But for 2 more days he did not dare to tell his teacher about it, fearing that he would order him to do more exercises. The leg swelled up so much that the coach noticed it himself and sent Li for x-rays. Fracture. The doctor put a thick layer of plaster on the leg, but it did not save the boy from training. Li was carried to the gym in his arms, and there he stood up, leaning on his back, and practiced strikes with his hands. When Jet was 11, China decided to select the best wushu athletes from all over the country. The boy made it to the top 30. The selected athletes received the right to represent China at demonstration competitions in the United States. This was extremely important for the PRC, as relations with the West were becoming extremely tense. Athletes were taught the rules of Western etiquette, to eat with a fork and knife, to behave with the press, to use electrical appliances. They were also told what they could say abroad and what they should not say. It took them 6 months to learn the basics of Western culture. Still, Lee got into an unpleasant situation that almost turned into a scandal. At an American airport, he saw a plane with the inscription Chinese Airlines and shouted, "Look, a plane from China." But the plane belonged to the state of Taiwan, with which China had a territorial dispute. But the boys had learnt dining etiquette perfectly and were very surprised when they saw their bodyguards eating chicken with their hands. It turned out that at school they had been taught table behavior according to the prim and proper rules of Buckingham Palace. A trip to the United States led Lee to question the ideology imposed on him and his peers by the Chinese authorities. He had been taught that everything Chinese was good and everything from the West was harmful. But here Lee realized how big the differences between the communist and capitalist systems were. He was particularly impressed by the backyard swimming pools in every American's home. But most importantly, the myth of evil Americans was debunked. Everyone around them turned out to be ordinary benevolent people, and if they were strict, such as their bodyguards, it was only for their own safety. At the final performance in Washington, Jet Li met President Richard Nixon. He praised the boy's skills. Nixon offered Lee to become his bodyguard, to which he refused. "I don't want to protect a particular person. I will protect my countrymen." These words were broadcast in the newspapers, marveling at the level of patriotism in China. From the trip, Lee brought back a Swiss watch, bought with the pocket money he and his comrades were given in America, and gave it to his mother. In 1972, Lee was enrolled on the Beijing Wushu team that represented the capital city at the National People's Games of the People's Republic of China. "It's like the Olympics, but only Chinese," Jet Li later recounted. He had already won the national youth competition, beating out the boys who were approaching 18 years of age. Now he had to compete against people in their 20s and 30s. Before the main competition, there were qualifying tournaments. At the first demonstration, Lee accidentally cut his head with his own sword. Everyone around him screamed in fear, but the boy did not notice anything, because all these years he had been trained to ignore the pain and go forward to victory. Training with a broken leg was much more painful. When he finished and bowed out, the girls on the team were crying. Lee got stitches and was told not to get up until the competition started. He was more worried not about whether he would be able to perform, but whether his mum would find out what had happened. At the turn of the 70s and 80s, Lee ended his sports career due to a serious knee injury and decided to focus on acting in films. The first experience of filming was the trilogy Shaolin Temple, 1982, 1984 and 1985, which told the story of a former slave who escaped from his tormentors and found shelter in a monastery. The monks have trained him in martial arts, and he is now determined to avenge his parents' murderer. All three films were hugely popular with audiences in Hong Kong and China. Creative pseudonym Jet Li, future actor, acquired in 1982 in the Philippines, when an advertising company announced that his real name is too difficult to pronounce. To the rescue came the PR people who compared Lee's successful career to an aeroplane taking off. The name Jet Li appeared on the poster for the athlete's debut film, Shaolin Temple, in 1982. In 1998, Jet debuted in the American action film A Lethal Weapon 4 with Mel Gibson, Danny Glover and Joe Pesci. It is noteworthy that in this film the actor played a villain for the first time. 2 years later, producer Joel Silver invited Lee to star in the film Romeo Must Die, in which the now-deceased singer Aaliyah appeared. The film became a box office hit. Although Lee still spoke very little English, his role as a Chinese mobster was highly praised by critics and audiences. In 2000, Lee had to turn down a role in the Chinese action film by Ang Lee, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because he promised his wife that he would not film during the months of her pregnancy. Jet's intended role was played by Chow Yun-fat, and the film became the highest-grossing non-English film in U.S. box office history. In 1987, Jet married Huang Qian, a member of the Beijing wushu team. Their marriage produced 2 daughters, 11 and Taimi. The couple separated in 1990. Since 1999, the actor has been married to Nina Li Chi, a Shanghai actress from Hong Kong. Nina gave birth to 2 daughters, Jane and Jada. In 2004, Jet Li was in the Maldives when a powerful tsunami struck the Indian Ocean. Although the news that Li had died was heavily speculated in the media, the actor suffered only a minor leg injury. In 2009, Jet Li renounced the previously obtained American citizenship. In July 2009, the actor became a citizen of Singapore. Jet chose this country because of the quality education system needed by his youngest daughters. In 2009, Li launched his own fitness program called Wuji, which consists of elements of wushu, yoga and Pilates. Adidas soon launched a clothing line for the program, emblazoned with the initials JL. Li is a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism. In his spare time, Jet plays badminton and table tennis, cycles, reads and meditates. Jet Li has rarely been in films lately. Money is not the main thing. Your health is your life, says the master.